Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2022 film Kids vs. Aliens. It's a Shudder exclusive and it's coming to Shudder Friday, April 14th. So for that reason, because the film's not out yet on Shudder and because it's a newer film, this is a no spoiler review, just so you know. So I will say off the bat, overall, I think this film is worth watching. I had a pretty fun time with it. You'll get my, full rating at the very end, but gonna get into it. Directed by Jason Eisener, who also did The Teeth Beneath, HBO, oh my gosh, Hobo with a Shotgun, a segment for VHS2, and a segment for the ABCs of Death. So you might be familiar with his work. It was written by Eisner as well as John Davies, who worked with Eisner on that segment in VHS2 and Hobo with a Shotgun, which also I highly recommend. Hobo with a Shotgun, great time. Rutger Hauer's in it. You gotta love Rutger Hauer. Amazing performances when he was around. Again, Shudder exclusive coming Friday, April 14th. Quick synopsis. I don't think I really need to give you one, to be honest, because this is a very face value story. It is literally called Kids vs. Aliens. It's about a group of kids, a la something like Stranger Things, or Summer of '84, or the first It film, those types of feels about the group of kids. And also, it's about aliens showing up, and then the kids versus aliens. So, really, I don't need to give a synopsis, because that's the story. It's not deep. There's not a whole lot of, character development. There's not a lot to the story, but it is a fun time, and it moves. It really moves, and it has some fun action parts to it, some fun practical effects parts to it, but I'll talk more about that as I go. The start of the film screams fun, and that's one of the big things. This film is geared towards light fun. It is fun. It's a good time. If you are a fan of just kind of sitting down, not having to think too much about a film, and just zoning out and just having a good time, this is the type of film for you. I'm into those films from time to time, so I was pretty pleased with this film when I watched it. It's not, it's not gonna win any sort of awards. It's not super deep. It's not a complex story or anything like that, but it's a good time. And I guarantee people had a really good time working on this film. It really seems like it. You can tell that not only with the finished product, but kind of how the performances came through in the film. I really do dig the performances of the kid actors. They're not only fun in their performances, but they're also appropriately funny, because this film does have a lot of comedic aspect to it. It literally is like horror comedy. And it is horror. It's not just mainly comedy. There is an actual horror element to it that's pretty solid in my opinion. Although I will talk in a little bit about some aspects that I didn't love about the film that could have been a lot better, but directing's well done. I mean, I would expect that from someone like Eisner. I remember from Hobo with a Shotgun, even though it's been a while since I've seen it, that directing and cinematography were very well handled. So it's good in this film, although it does have this kind of sci-fi channel feel to the film. It feels like it belongs there in a certain way. Now, if you've seen it, let me know if you feel the same way. I mean, comments down there about anything. If you've seen this film, whether you like it, hate it, in between on it, and let me know. Just give me a sentence or two, and we can talk spoilers in the comments. Just know that. So, the characters created are interesting, and the dialogue is actually pretty well written. It feels very realistic. Like I said, these aren't in-depth characters. There's not really much character development or anything, but the characters are intriguing. They're interesting. They grab your attention. You do root for them. You want them to do well, i.e. survive. And they're engaging. They suck you in, and they do it immediately, because the opening sequence, like I said, a fun time. It screams fun. It's got a great synth 80s score. I'm a big fan of that type of thing. That's something that it had a kind of similar, actually the beginning, not only the score, but the actual just overall feel of what's going on in the film had a bit of a Psycho Goreman vibe. And I think that gets maintained for a decent amount through the film. but it does change eventually from that 80s synth score that I was really digging to kind of like more cheesy 90s score, and I wasn't feeling it as much because it really is very over the top and ridiculous, and I like more restrained scores for the most part, and this one's like screaming at you the entire film. So that's one of the issues I did have with the film that, I know that doesn't bother everyone. It does bother me. There's some real frantic camera work at times. Now, I will say this about it. There's frantic camera work for a very certain reason in the beginning of the film, and then there's frantic camera work throughout the rest of the film for another reason. So it works within the context of the film, but there's a lot of movement to the camera, there's shakiness and all that, but it works for what's going on. It's not one of those things where it's like people are sitting still and the camera's like moving too much. It's not that. It's the film keeps moving for the most part, so the camera also keeps moving for the most part. When the kids are playing with each other, it is wildly imaginative, wildly fun, in my opinion. There's a lot of interesting thought that went into putting that together. I mean, when you think about what it probably said in the script, like actually on the page, versus how they brought it to the screen, I can't imagine what that process was like. It was a great transition, and I'm going to bet that they improved a lot over what was actually, said on the page of the script. So I like that. There are legitimately funny moments. Like I said, it's got a comedic element to it. There are a few times I legitimately chuckled to myself. No like laughing out loud, but it is really hard to get me to laugh out loud when I'm watching a film by myself. But chuckled to myself a few times, so that's good. Shows you that there's some decent comedy at play in this, at least for, what I like. It does feel like the story gets stuck, and it should get moving a lot sooner. That was one of my other big issues, is it kind of like establishes the way things are. It establishes who the characters are and what their relationships are, and what the overall premise of the film is going to be very early. And then it feels like it just keeps kind of rehashing the same thing for a while. Granted, it is entertaining to a degree what they're rehashing, but I did find myself getting a little bit impatient with that and being like, okay, I mean, are we gonna like move forward? But like I said, there's not a lot of actual like story to it, so I understand why it ended up being that way. If you're gonna put kind of filler in, it might as well be entertaining filler, and that's kind of like they do that, so I'm relatively okay with it. The aliens don't look so hot. This is one of my other big issues. Don't really like the design of the aliens. They're very boring, in my opinion. They could have gone many other directions, made it a lot more interesting. But how they use them is good. I do like how they use the aliens. I just wish there was something different design-wise for them. But I think they probably went the way they did, probably because of budget constraints. That's my biggest guess, because it does come off as a real low-budget film. Like I was saying, like felt like it would be at home on the Sci-Fi Channel to a degree. There are some fun and at times kind of gross practical effects. If you're a big fan of practical effects, they're solid enough practical effects. There are a few nice gore gags to it, and like I said, there's some grossness involved with it. I don't think overly so, but if you're very, very touchy about like certain gross things in horror films, it might get you. But for most people, I'm sure it's going to be totally fine. There's one character in this that I think is just so over the top, it's eye-roll inducing. And they just keep being over the top. It doesn't seem to jive with reality or what's going on in the film all that much. It seems like it was a thing out of convenience, that they just really wanted that character to be that way. And it's too much. It's too over the top. It really grated on me throughout the film, so I really did have a problem with that. Like I said, it's a very face value film. Just be there for the fun, because it does have a lot of fun to it. The ending is fine. I didn't love the ending. I didn't dislike the ending. It was kind of like, okay, it's an okay ending. I'm good with it enough. And just know there is a post-credit scene, so don't turn the film off once the credits start running. I know a lot of people do that. I am guilty of that many times, but I would say stick around. There's a post-credit scene, and it's worth watching. I think the post-credit scene's definitely worth it. It's not an overly long film with credits and everything. It's an hour and 15 minutes, so I really appreciate that. For the most part, it feels like it just takes the time that it needs to tell the story that it's going to tell and have, the fun that it wants to have with the audience. But like I said, there are those moments where you're like, okay, I feel like we could kind of get moving a little bit more. So some things could have been cut down, but I really do appreciate the fact that they didn't try and stretch it to an hour and a half when it really doesn't have the material for that so much. So, yeah. It is quite charming in a lot of ways, and it falls in well with all the groups of kids taking on evil movies that have become kind of popular over the past decade or so. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of slots in there with a bunch of the other ones, and if you like that type of film, then you'll probably have a relatively good time with this one. So, out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I am going to give it 3 stars. I was close to giving it 3.5 stars, but some of the issues that I brought up just kind of made me veer a little bit more towards 3 as opposed to 3.5. So just know I was close on 3.5 though. So really it'd be like a 3.25, but I don't really do quarters. So, but again, would love to hear your thoughts on the film once you've seen it. Go ahead and put it in the comments. We'll talk about it, or just horror in general. That's fine. Do me a favor, hit subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. That's your best way to repay me if you like this video or any video I've ever done, and I really appreciate it. Also hit the notification bell button if you want to know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm doing 3 or 4 a week, depending on Shudder releases. 4 if they're releasing one that week, 3 if they're not. But regardless, thank you very much for taking your time to watch this video, and until next time, keep it brutal.